Hello and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host, Taylor Rockwell. Daryl Grove not joining me today. Instead, I will be joined by Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching for the United Soccer Coaches. Ian joins me to discuss trends in American coaching, but also looking at sort of like how to further develop coaching, the areas that maybe need to be explored to get more people involved in coaching and involved in soccer in general here in the country. We then later on move into talking about Liverpool versus Manchester United. Worth noting that this interview was recorded Monday afternoon before Jose Mourinho was fired/left Manchester United. I say that to say that we do have a conversation in there about like what the rest of the season looks like for Jose Mourinho. I think Ian is a little bit more on board with Jose continuing through the end of the season than I am, but I'll let you listen to find out why. But then that conversation is primarily focused on what Jurgen Klopp has done with Liverpool, how he's managed to bring out the best in, say, players like Fabinho, and where Liverpool go from here. So that's very interesting. And then we close out by talking about Gregg Berhalter, with him taking over the U.S. men's national team, what areas Ian thinks are like the most in need of development and Berhalter's attention, and then how he expects the United States to perform going forward. So as I said, lots of topics discussed, but Ian is the type of person to discuss those topics with. He is an incredibly accomplished coach. Ian has been the Director of Coaching Education, his current position with United Soccer Coaches, since 2012. Before that, he was the head men's soccer coach at McAllister College in Minnesota, but he's been in and around the game for many, many years. He's been all over the world, in Europe, South America, Central America, Africa. He's got coaching badges galore, licenses galore. So Ian has a whole wealth of experience and a whole wealth of knowledge that I very much enjoyed learning from. So with all that said, let's get to my conversation with Mr. Ian Barker. Joining me on the line now, I've got Mr. Ian Barker, the Director of Coaching for the United Soccer Coaches. Ian, thank you very much for taking the time today.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, it's nice to have you on the show finally. We first met when we were doing the tour in Kansas City. You were very kind. You gave us a nice tour of the headquarters and told us some great stories, some of which I will not mention here. But it was very nice to make your acquaintance, and it's good to have you finally on the show.
Yeah, the tour was a lot of fun. I think we were one of your first stops.
Mm-hmm.
So the blend of the podcast guys, the comedians, and the fan interaction. I know that a lot of people from Sporting Kansas City attended the show, and we had a good time, so we really enjoyed it.
Well, that's good. Well, you've got some preparations of your own, some stuff to line up because you've got the convention coming up. How's that shaping up? Are there any events or seminars, presentations that you are particularly looking forward to?
Sure. So the convention's in Chicago for the first time. They've been really great about welcoming us. So the City Convention Visitor Bureau, the Mayor, Rahm Emanuel, and then the Fire and Illinois Youth Soccer particularly have been really supportive. So that's great. We have a lot of European clubs coming in various capacities. Valencia, I just spoke to this morning, Celtic, a few English Premier League clubs. Obviously, we have the draft, so that brings in a ton of people that are just coming in to see how their teams do in the draft, both MLS and NWSL. And then, my primary responsibility is to be in that education space. So we'll have well over 250 educational offerings, be they classroom and field. And you can get everything from, like a La Liga club or an EPL club or an MLS club down to some of the more fundamental grassroots content. And then a lot of what, for want of a better expression, soft skills. So psychology, man management, nutrition, a lot of the things around the game now that at the highest levels, when you look on TV, you can see the entourage of staff that a big club has. Mm-hmm. And even at the youth level in America now, and certainly college and high school, there's more sports science involved all the time.
So is that an area of particular interest this time around, or is that just one of many? Because I think what we enjoyed last time, because we had like the presidential debate, I think was happening, or the U.S. soccer presidential debate, such as it was happening at the same time. You had lots of like the candidate one-on-one interviews, and those were all fascinating. But we really enjoyed is kind of going around and seeing just some of the presentations, especially from a tactical standpoint, focusing on maybe not necessarily intentionally, but it felt like a couple of them focused on sort of areas of deficiency in U.S. soccer, just because like we went to one where there was a guy like trying to get some players to work with him, and it felt like they were sort of not like processing what he was saying, and then they kind of slowly figured it out. And to see how they adjusted to a European coach coming in was particularly fascinating. So is that an area that you all are looking at, or is it just sort of all widespread?
No, well, so it's really interesting. So I think a lot of the audience come to watch the field sessions and get more training activities. That's an audience. There's another audience which they feel okay in the field space, but they want to go and get some of the insights that come through video and through data collection and research. But what I think is interesting on the floor space, the experience you had, is our European guests or some of our even our MLS top end presenters, they won't have met the kids before, and the demo players could be maybe a local college team, but they very often come from the youth market, and so they have been those players have been coached by, let's say, maybe a US soccer C or D license coach, probably not necessarily a full-time coach. So when they get exposed to somebody who has maybe slightly higher expectations of training protocols and is very demanding, it's nice to see how the American players can respond that quickly in a really tough environment, because they're on a carpet, or a synthetic surface, which is maybe 60 by 40 in front of 2,000 people. So if you can get some performance out of players, they've done really well for sure, and so has the coach.
Are there areas like that you think you would like to see the U.S. game like develop from a coaching standpoint in that regard? Like you're talking about the players maybe not being familiar with those training protocols or not like being accustomed to that high level of expectation. Is that something that you think has changed for the better in the last like 5 to 10 years, or is that something that you think maybe needs to be looked at for improvement?
No, you have to consider it a real positive that we have MLS academies that don't charge the players to participate. That there's some long-term challenges there when you have a lot of young players maybe giving up high school, some of them giving up college, and then trying to make their way in a professional realm. That's a huge discussion we can have if you want to go that route. But in terms of player development, if we start there, what's really cool is in the MLS environment, the players are getting a lot more functional training at younger ages. So they're identifying really early a player they think could be a potential number 10 or a potential number 6 or a potential wide right or potential wide left. And the players are getting training for roles that they can fulfill within the team, but within the club structure. So, for example, at Sporting Kansas City, it's a pretty strict 4-3-3 type program. So now the academy models that. I think that really helps players as opposed to what I call generic training, where the 18 kids go, they do the same training, and the centre backs, the goalkeeper, well, maybe not the goalkeeper, but the strikers and midfielders are all doing essentially the same activity. So I do think we're seeing some real significant evolution in player development, and it's being driven by external forces. But when you have the MLS doing it, it's then trickling down to the other academies and the US youth and US club environments for sure.
And just to clarify, forgive me if I'm dense, but so would that be like center backs breaking off to do like defensive drills while attackers are working on like possession and hold up play, or is it not necessarily that specialized?
No, it'll be that specialized too.
Okay.
So, you can go to good academy training sessions, certainly in the MLS environment, where maybe an age group, so let's say the 13s and 14s, the coaches pull out all the center backs and maybe the fullbacks, and they'll go work with them. So maybe you start mixing the ages, but they're doing, the best example for your listeners and colleagues is goalkeeping, right? We've always trained the goalkeeper to catch it, throw it, drop kick it. Well, now we're actually training all of the players with their specific requirements of their task. So centre backs, bringing the ball out the air, knocking a pass, winning tackles, strikers finishing. So I think this is now it's really difficult to do at the grassroots amateur level when it's one coach with 18 kids. Mm-hmm. But if you're in a club with 2 or 3 assistant coaches, you can start doing this functional training.
And is that, like, in your position, is that something where you all are coming up with a, like, not necessarily a curricula, but like a recommended series of drills or a recommended approach to training? Or is it something where you're just sort of looking at everything that's being done and you're sort of saying, like, yeah, that can work and that can work too, and sure, why not that? Or do you want it to be a bit more specific across the board?
It's a good question. So I think most people agree that at the younger ages, and we're probably sort of in that 10 and under, at least in our American culture, we still want all the kids participating, playing with different positions, really starting to express themselves with a heavy emphasis, increasing emphasis, because we got away from it on technical preparation. So we're looking at competencies we expect 9, 10, 11, 12-year-olds to have in terms of receiving, passing, shooting, taking the ball out of the air. At some point, though, maybe in that 11 and 12, when they're starting to lapse into the 9v9, which is the prescribed playing format for U.S. soccer, is now we're actually saying to them, I want you to go out and play the number 2 role, or go out and play the number 9 role, and the kids have an understanding of what that role entails, and that they've been given some of the technical qualities to execute it.
Last year at the convention, the concern that it seemed like we most heard about was kids falling through the cracks, pay to play, some of the deficiencies within the system. Is there one particular issue that you think is sort of plaguing U.S. soccer when it comes to coaching, or one thing you would like to see sort of specifically focused on?
Yeah, we have to continue to work on ways to encourage kids to game play without the 2 90-minute sessions a week with the coach in the nice facility, and then they go off and play 3 tournament games on a weekend. Mm-hmm. Everybody says it, but we still don't always get to the point of fixing that problem. I get really tired of all the people that you can hear say, pay to play is terrible, pay to play is terrible. Mm-hmm. Most of them are getting paid really well out of the pay to play structure. So we've created an economy of youth sports. We've created an environment where there are many young male and female coaches who depend on coaching for their livelihoods. So somebody's got to pay for that. Mm-hmm. But I do think we can reduce the costs, and I do think we need to drive the players. We're not going to recreate the favelas of Brazil, or the romantic notion of the east side of London 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. But what is stunning is that very often our kids, if you leave them with a bag of balls and some cones, they can't get a game of pickup going, right? Or they can't get a simple rondo going. And so I think we as coaches, and with the support of parents, need to be saying to kids, get in the back garden and play some 2v2. Sometimes at training, the coach sit down and shut up, and it's painful initially, but encourage the kids to make up their own games, keep their own scores. I think that is an initiative that we all need to be driving towards more. And I struggle when you're in a big metropolitan area and you've got 9-year-olds that have to travel to other cities for soccer competition. I mean, if you're in a big metropolitan area and you can't find a group of 9-year-olds that can compete with you, then you must be really talented. So I just think we need to cut down on the time and money that the kids are spending and have it more driven towards activity.
Going back to the rondo point for a second, for those who don't know that one, that like 5v2, keep away even is a simpler way. But it's really funny you mentioned that, because one thing that I found in coaching younger kids is that it's always, and it was when I was playing, it's all about the scrimmage, that they want to scrimmage another team, or they want to, play 7v7 or what have you against an opponent. It's all about putting the ball in the back of the net. And it does feel like there's a mentality shift that has to happen of, oh no, you can just do a whole practice session of just the rondo and variations of that. And it seems like unless you have like a goal to be scored and the sort of the glory that comes with it, it does feel like sometimes it's hard to get young soccer players into different types of training like experiences, I guess. So is that something that you have experienced? And like, what do you think might be, if so, what might be a good way to go about for coaches out there to get their players to think differently than, oh, I just need to score the goal and then I've done my job?
Yeah. So there's fantastic, ongoing debates. Rondos are the answer. Rondos are to be abandoned and given up on. So the rondos are a very polarizing topic.
That's surprising to hear.
There's this. Well, trust me, I got into a Twitter space on that. I can share with you a little bit how that went. But then there's also this thing right now, play, practice, play. So the idea is you set up small-sided games and the kids come in and they just play. Mm-hmm. That's the first thing they do. This is my opinion, and your listeners that are coaching youth soccer teams, if you go out to the training, you break the kids into 2 equal groups, and you play, let's say you've got 7 aside. The level of enthusiasm for that, the level of energy, the level of competition dissipates really, really quickly. because they've been brought into a coach-centered environment. They've been given all the facilities. They've been put into teams, and unless you've got really charismatic individuals who will make it competitive and call other people out and try things, that's not that environment, that coach-centric environment, the trained environment in their nice facility is not where the kids need to be doing a lot of their quote-unquote scrimmaging. That should be, before the coach gets there, they get there half an hour early and they literally drop their kit bags down and they've got one knackered ball and they play some 3v3 keep away. Mm-hmm. What we as coaches need to do is make trainings competitive. Now, the outcome of competition, whether you penalize kids for losing or you create little gag things like, the team that comes second goes and gets water for the team that won the game. But I think you can make a rondo, and if you watch online, Real Madrid or Barcelona or Bayern Munich doing rondos, they're pretty competitive. They're pretty lively. The players have personality. And you can certainly get that in a 3v3 keep or a 4v4 keep away. But the coach can't just expect in our American players, in my opinion, the ones that we sort of have in that traditional US youth soccer, US club model. I don't think we can just assume that kids know how to play in the environment, because I think we've killed. There's a lot of things, but I think also we as coaches, amongst other things, have killed that innate ability just to play.
So what would you advise then? Because speaking for me at least, I'll say I definitely probably err on the side of too much instruction when coaching both kids and adults. I feel like it's a lot of, oh no, go here. Oh no, you need to drop here. Oh no, this needs to be here. And it does feel like at a certain point or very early, you're removing a lot of the independent thinking and instead you're just coaching, listen to the coach and he'll tell you what to do, as opposed to you should know what to do and then be able to adapt from that. So for a person like me, you can speak to me here, who maybe does err on the side of overcoaching, what are some ways to kind of change that way of thinking, or how can you go about not doing that? Aside from, is it maybe just as simple as keep my mouth closed?
Yeah, but I would defend you a little bit too. So if you're coaching youth players, the parents of they're paying for the club, and maybe you're getting compensated. There's this sort of expectation that the coach has to be seen to be doing something. Mm-hmm. And I think that is actually a common weakness of the less experienced coach or the less secure coach. But I can understand where it comes from. And I think we've all been guilty at it at different times. There's nothing better, though, than setting up. So, for example, you set up a little 3v3, 3v3 games, because you've got a dozen kids at training. And you randomize the teams and they play 3v3 for 3 minutes and you put a little challenge in there. The next time you play, let's say you make it 2-touch with a 1-touch finish. So there's a little challenge in there, and they get to solve that challenge. They got to work out how to play the ball 2-touch and then set up the guy for a 1-touch finish. Or you set up 4 goals, and then you can attack corner goals, whatever it is. And then we as coaches, we create these little challenges. We don't necessarily have all the answers on how to solve them. So we don't tell them all the answers before we then put them in the game. And you observe. And when one of the kids does something that is really bright or interesting, maybe that you weren't looking for, sometimes you're looking for it, sometimes you're not, then you celebrate that. And you say, hey, did you see what, James or Jane just did? James or Jane, what were you thinking? Well, that goal was kind of congested, so I spun out and went to the other goal. A learning moment for everybody, and that learning moment comes from a kid. So now the other 9-year-olds or 10-year-olds can say, well, if James and Jane can do it, maybe I can do it. As opposed to you setting up the 3v3 game, telling them the 25 things they should be looking to do, and none of those things have even occurred in the game yet. So I think the coach has a really critical role, but it increasingly becomes setting the challenge, observing the solutions that the players are making, and then guiding them through those solutions.
That's really interesting, and a good reason why, or a good reminder why these conversations and things like the convention are very useful. Because even just one point there was, I think if I stop a practice, I'm glad this has just become a referendum on my coaching style. But if I stop in that moment, I will say okay, he or she did this, and that's why this worked, and that's great. You should all do that. But it doesn't occur to me to ask them to be able to explain, and that is a fundamental part of it, right? Is being able to articulate or at least understand to yourself why why you have made that decision. And I think then, it conveys to your teammates that, oh, okay, I should be thinking that way too, or I should be able to defend my actions. So that's a really interesting wrinkle. So thank you for that. That should help with the coaching a little bit.
Well, I think the coach is doing a lot more that way than standing there like an animated Muppet talking and giving information continual stream. You're a much more thoughtful and deliberate coach if you understand how to set up and tweak the challenge, observe, and then interact at the back end of the experience. And with the notion that the kids are being active the majority of the time, and when you do interject, it's at the right time with the right bite-sized piece of information that either the individual or the group can get something out of.
All right. Well, speaking of thoughtful and understanding, let's talk Twitter, because I want to hear about this Rondo debate.
Okay. So I would never go on another podcast, obviously, but I was on Sirius Radio with Glenn Crooks and the Coaching Academy last week. Uh-huh. And the opening session at convention that I'm doing is called Bringing Training Sessions to Life Through Rondos. And Glenn was giving me kind of a hard time. And I was kind of laughing because there was a debate on Twitter a little while ago that U.S. Soccer had allegedly said that you never did rondos, which was not completely true. They didn't say that exactly, but they had sort of marginalized the rondo a little bit. So people jumped all over Twitter about it. And then as people are saying, love rondos, hate rondos, it became very clear that a lot of people were talking about different things. So I couldn't even have told you a couple of months ago what the sort of textbook definition of a rondo was. So I posed that question, and I got enough different responses to suggest that a rondo means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. I have, on the basis of all of this helpful data that I got from Twitter, I've composed a training session and some of the highlights just for those people that are interested. So rondo is essentially a keep-away game. So I don't know when it became sexy to call it a rondo, because I think we were doing keep-away games when I was a boy, which was a long time ago. But the idea of the rondos now is that they always have competition. So there's always somebody trying to steal the ball. There's a debate about whether the team that has the inferior numbers is always the team that has inferior numbers, or you can switch players in and out. There's a debate about that. There's a debate about the shape of rondos. Can they be done in a circle or a triangle, a rectangle? Square. There's a debate about whether they should end up going to goal or whether they should at least have direction, sort of north-south. So it's really fascinating. And if you YouTube, you typically get what is credited to Pep Guardiola is a 4v4 plus 3 rondo, which has a lot of the elements I discussed, but not all of them. But that is sort of put out by a lot of rondo aficionados as the be-all and end-all of rondos. So I'm going to play around with it. I'm going to present 7 different training activities, which I consider rondos at the convention, and then wait to be trolled on Twitter. So we'll see.
All right. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about the U.S. national team, a little bit about Liverpool, but I did have one more question for you. We've talked a bit about like deficiencies or potential areas of deficiencies or problem areas when it comes to coaching in the U.S. One thing we've had a few questions about is about minorities in prominent coaching positions, more specifically the lack thereof, looking at, say, Major League Soccer as an example. Do you think this is an issue? And if you do, what do you think needs to be done to work towards finding a solution?
Well, this is the first time I've ever told this story in public. So this is an exclusive,
all right,
and it's opening up a vein, and I don't need to be sued. A number of years ago, when ODP was a very important program relative to there being no academies, all of the coaches in it, most of the coaches in it were white, but we started getting African-American players coming in, including from my region, Darlington Nagby was an ODP player. And one of the challenges was we would travel the teams internationally, certainly to Central America. And our fear was always if you had player discipline issues in Central America, it was a lot more problematic than if you had them in Europe, let's say. So we had to evaluate the players and be concerned about their behavior, not only their soccer ability. And I am convinced that back then there was an unintentional institutional racism because the almost exclusively white coaches had a different cultural touch point to a lot of our African-American players. then we, fortunately, in some regions, we saw African American coaches working, like Eddie Henderson, he was at Kansas at the time, Brian Tompkins, who was on the East region from Yale, and that really helped. But my experience is, even the kids are great. So when I'm going to Florida tomorrow with ODP, we'll have Hispanic kids, we'll have African American kids, we'll have African kids, and we'll certainly have more Caucasian kids. The kids are great. They respond to adults. They want to be coached. They're at a higher level. But clearly, anytime you put in front of that athlete somebody who looks like them, somebody who maybe speaks their first language, somebody who has some other cultural touch points, it's got to be engaging for the player. Mm-hmm. So we're starting to see the players come, but we're not really seeing a corresponding movement in the coaches. Are there barriers for coaching? Well, our coaching models in America are quite academic. I mean, to go through a U.S. soccer course, and even the courses that I run with United Soccer Coaches, it requires some computer literacy. They're almost exclusively taught in English, although we're both developing Spanish content. They're not inexpensive. They require time and travel. So I don't think we're welcoming coaches in as easily as we're welcoming players in. We're welcoming players in because if they give us the ability to win, we'll go pick them. Mm-hmm. So I think the drive, and then what I do think is that if there are African American players, if there are players from Africa, if there are players that identify as Hispanic, a lot of times their parents and or their relatives need to step up into these initial coaching roles, the volunteer ones, get into these clubs, because I just feel like we're doing our players a disservice because I think there's more diversity in our player pool and less diversity in our coach pool. Mm-hmm. And the same would apply to girls, of course.
Of course. That makes sense. And in terms of like the areas that you mentioned with it's not inexpensive. You have to travel a long distance. It requires varying levels of technical ability or technological ability rather. Are there things that you think can be done to like lower some of those hurdles a little bit to make it a little bit more accessible and easy?
Yeah. Interestingly, this wasn't the point of the call, but we just received a grant from Target. And 91 Target stores have made a contribution to our charitable foundation for 91 coaching schools around those stores, all around America, Denver particularly, Detroit, Portland. There's five or six metro areas. So Target is going to pay for the coaching school. So somewhere close to the Target store, coaches will be invited in, and it won't be money contingent, and it won't be based on their previous qualifications. So they're being billed as urban, and they're primarily in built-up metropolitan areas. But that's what we have to do. Now, mm-hmm. When you make something free, you don't always get a widespread adoption. You also have to explain to coaches if they're going to give 3, 4, 5 hours of their time, what will they get out of it? What is the value? So it's not easy, but definitely foundational support, scholarship support, which we get at my organization, has been really helpful.
And is there, for those 91 coaching schools and the 91 participating targets, is there a name for that program? Forgive me if you've already mentioned it.
No, it's really, we literally received the funding last Friday, but I'll get it to you, to your show, and you can put it out on one of the subsequent podcasts.
More from my conversation with Ian in just a moment, but first I wanted to let you know about today's sponsor. Since Ian is a Liverpool fan, it seems only fitting. It's Liverpool jeans. I'm wearing them right now. They remain as comfortable as ever. Liverpool jeans offer a variety of sizes and styles for both men and women. If you're not big, I'm wearing the skinny jeans style right now, but if you're not into those, they also offer you the relaxed straight, which is a little bit more of a loose fit. The women's section has even more variety. They've got jeans, they've got jackets, tops, pants, everything you could imagine to cover every aspect of your wardrobe is handled by Liverpool jeans. And strangely enough, I believe they defeated Manchester United jeans 3-1 recently. I'm not sure what the equivalent of that would be for denim, but I'm sure they could pull it off. On a slightly more serious note, when we were on tour this summer, I was very thankful for my Liverpool jeans because when I travel, if I'm flying, I tend to wear like warm-up pants usually because they're a bit more comfortable, easier for mobility when it comes to travel and being confined in tight spaces, as airplanes want you to be. But Liverpool jeans would be the only jeans I think I would wear because they've got the stretch, they've got the like 1% spandex, 99% cotton that makes it feel very comfortable, so you can sit and enjoy your flight to the extent possible. Best of all, our listeners can get 20% off any order by using the code TSS at checkout. So go to liverpooljeans.com and enter the code TSS at checkout to get 20% off your order. Thank you to Liverpool Jeans for sponsoring today's episode. Now back to my conversation with Ian. I wanted to get into a little bit about the philosophy of your coaching style, if you're okay with that, because I saw a little while back, I think it was, you were doing an interview, you were asked what your like 3 to 5 key components of coaching. You mentioned compassion for players, communication, competitive energy, perspective, and I think self-understanding. So first of all, do those hold up for you? And second, if they do, who are the current coaches that you think like best embody those principles that people, like some names that people might know?
Yeah, I don't know where you got that list, although I think it's actually would probably be the list I come up with this afternoon. It's this warm fuzzy bunny kind of idea comes from a lot of experience. Mm-hmm. So when I was younger, I just wanted to beat everybody, get all the best players, and win trophies, and that was, and you have to do that, right? That's certainly part of our job, and certainly you don't get to stay around in the game for significant periods of time if you don't win some games. So I can't fault the young me for being that naive and inexperienced. Now, many years later, what I realize is the human interactions are the key. They're the key to being competitively successful. And they are certainly the key to finding greater value in the game once the trophies have tarnished, if you want a very romantic image. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you look right now, those your listeners that were watching yesterday, the challenge that Mourinho is having in his interpersonal relationships, which he previously has had no problems with when he's been at Chelsea the first time, Porto, and in the early days in other environments. But now that's really a problem for him. You could argue that sense of perspective, right? So grassroots coaches listening to your podcast, high school coaches, college coaches, when you lose games, you take it really personally. You probably find out and probably realize that your kids get over it much quicker than you do. I would say that's a lack of perspective on the coach's part, thinking it's all about the coach. I also think in the grassroots environment, not talking professionally now, if you can show that you give a damn about the 12th, 13th, 14th kid on your roster, the messaging you're sending to the best player and the best 2 or 3 players is really powerful. Because what happens a lot in our environments is we focus on our best 1 or 2 players that get all the attention, all the accolades, and the rest of the kids are cannon fodder. But if you do it the other way, if you actually pay attention to the lower part of your squad, I think you elevate the whole group. So that's just a thought there. If I was looking at a modern example of somebody who I think's got things in a really good place that reflects their personality and his quality, it just happens to be Sporting Kansas City, where I'm a season ticket holder, and the way that Peter runs the program, Peter Vermees. He's been very successful in a what we might consider a small market. He's been really sharp with his movement of players. So Dom Dwyer, who was a star, Benny Fellhaber, who was a star, they move out and new people come in with new energy and new refreshed ideas. Peter's got a really strong personality, but he's got vision. And you can see, for all the gruffness on the outside, you can see that his interactions with his players is very personal and humane. So I think he's a good example of an MLS coach that really seems to have worked it out right now. I think if you look at world soccer, so if you just look at EPL, if you look at world soccer, Guardiola, it's going great, but he's definitely had his problems in the past with players, certainly most notably Yaya Toure. Mm-hmm. Everything's falling into Klopp's lap right now. Mourinho is in a downswing. I think there's something sort of this medieval wheel of fortune. When you're at the very top, you're ultimately, you can only go into sort of a downward decline or a decline. And if you're at the very bottom, there's really only one place to go, is up, should you not just fall off the map and become irrelevant. So, there but for the grace goes all of us.
That's a far more nuanced perspective on Liverpool than I was expecting, because you are a Liverpool fan, correct?
Yes. The listeners that have a familiarity with the UK, I was born in Essex, so I should have a David Beckham accent. My club, Southend, is a perennial third or fourth tier club, and although the closest Premier League club to me would have been West Ham, when I was a young man, Liverpool were the best club in England, albeit with Irish and Scottish players. So in the old European Cup days, Keegan and Toshak, and then later Dalglish and Rush. So I fell in love with Liverpool.
And is Southend the Shrimpers, or have I made that up?
That is very good. They are the Shrimpers, yeah.
All right. I remember things from our scouting network. That's good. I'm happy to hear that.
That's very good.
So what did you make of Liverpool's victory yesterday? Was it enjoyable, stressful, frustrating, or maybe all of the above?
Well, the first 20 minutes were ridiculous. How strong Liverpool were and how relatively poor Man United were. So a lot of love for Liverpool in the first 20 minutes. The having Keita and Fabinho start together, which I'm not sure, I don't know that I've seen that in the Premier League. And then I was listening to a show called Grumpy Pundits this morning, and one of the callers called in and said, "What the hell happened to Fabinho? How did he suddenly become so good so quickly?" But the interesting thing yesterday was Fabinho looked like he'd been a Liverpool player for years, and he hadn't done that up to this point.
Yeah.
I think you could say this is an accurate reflection of the difference between Man United and Liverpool now on a sustained basis. But you don't want to be crowning Liverpool over Man United too quickly, because there's a ton of talent at Man United, and if they can work out how to bring it together, they have one of the top 2 or 3 squads in the league, if not the composition of it.
So, sticking with United then for a moment, I know, speaking as an outsider, obviously, but when you see that team play, do you see a team that has just kind of lost faith in the manager, or lost faith in what they're being asked to do, or do you see something else?
It's a great question, because Mourinho has often been credited with some of the antics in the press, which have made him very popular or very outrageous and very much the focus. The idea was that he was taking focus away from his players. What seems to be the case right now is that it looks, on the surface at least, that a lot of the players have given up on him. Now, when I'm getting paid £300,000 to £500,000 a week, giving up seems to be pretty insulting towards the fans and the club, because I still want my $300,000, even if I'm going to go and put half a shift in. The Pogba thing is a distraction, because I don't think Pogba wears his disappointment very well. Yes, there have been injuries, and after Sir Alex, where the squad needed complete overhaul anyway, you had the Moyes era, a Van Gaal era, and what Mourinho has not done is really made this his era yet. But they look disorganized, they look disjointed, they look unhappy. I mean, Marcus Rashford looks like he burst into tears every 5 minutes. And he's had other times in his career when he's been a difference maker. So, yeah, it's really sad, actually. I mean, I'm not a Liverpool, so I'm not one of these people that loves Liverpool, and then by definition you have to hate Man United and you have to hate Everton. That's stupid to me, but that's what maybe real fans are like. But what it is disappointing that Man United is in such a poor place right now, because the Premier League is enhanced by Man United being a good club.
Let me ask you this then, because you brought up Pogba, you brought up Fabinho. Fabinho, that's a player who I'm not a Liverpool fan. I'm actually a Man United fan, full disclosure there. But from what I understand, basically, Fabinho signed, and then I'm sure you can speak to this, but for whatever reason, he doesn't just quite fit with the system right away, or doesn't understand the system, or isn't up to speed with it. So he is one who kind of is on the bench at best, sometimes not even in the squad, and yet it seems seems like now has been brought along and maybe kind of dealt with that, got to terms with things, and is now in this position where he does shine and does look like a Liverpool player that's been there for 10 years. And you contrast that with Paul Pogba, who's a player who you fully expect to be starting but is on the bench now, and it doesn't seem like it's doing him any favors or helping him kind of develop a greater understanding of what's being asked. So what do you think the difference is there, and what do you think Klopp did to get Fabinho to the place where he is versus what Mourinho is doing with Pogba?
Great. I'm glad you're a Man United fan, because this conversation can just go on indefinitely.
Pretty much.
So Fabinho, I think there are stories with players. So in addition to their personalities, you've got to look at the story a little bit. So with Fabinho coming from the continent into the EPL and then having to work out how to live somewhere in Liverpool with the weather, the climate, the fish and chip shops, a huge adjustment, right? So even though these are global players and they play all over the world, I think coming into the EPL from a continental side is a unique challenge. And even with a big price tag, Klopp had the ability to play Milner, Wijnaldum, Henderson, a couple of other people to give Fabinho a grounding in time, which he did with Robertson, the fullback. Even though people wanted to see Mourinho gone, he brought Robertson along slowly. So that's one story. With Pogba, you've got the most expensive player in the world at the time. He's just scored a goal in the World Cup final. He's got probably a slightly different personality than Fabinho because he has a different role. Fabinho's role is much more of a holding one. It's less of a star role. And so, Pogba's head is in a completely different place. And then, I think I've met Mourinho and I've listened to him speak and listened to him talk about his player relationships. And I think he's genuinely a nice man who cares about his players. But I also think he's in a place right now where he's had a track record of alienating some of the bigger stars. And what tends to happen when you alienate the bigger stars, if you can't get rid of them, it brings the rest of the squad down. So, again, from what we see as fans, because that's all that you and I are in this case, when you look at it yesterday, it looks like Klopp is a genius man manager, tactical wizard, and Mourinho's a schmuck. Well, Mourinho's he had some great loyalty out of players when he was at Chelsea. He's won a couple of Champions Leagues. As he'll tell you, he's qualified for 14 straight Champions League knockout stages. He's won league titles. I wouldn't be writing Mourinho off right now, but something's going to break at Man United before it gets better.
So what do you, when you say you're not writing him off, then is that just there's an expectation of it's Jose Mourinho, he'll figure something out, or have you seen signs from United or from your coaching history that says to you that maybe there's a way to salvage the season for United? I promise I'm not just asking that as a United fan, but generally as an interested party. There has to be a coming together of Mourinho and Pogba that gets Pogba on the field. Mm-hmm. So it's in the best interest of Man United as a club. I think it's in the best interest of Mourinho as a manager. I'm not sure it's in the best interest of Pogba as a player necessarily, but it's certainly for Mourinho and Man United, it's best that Pogba's on the field because he is the most expensive, or one of the most expensive players in the world, and his body language and everything else when he's on the bench just draws the cameras, right? So, people are saying, you don't want to get rid of him until the end of the season, get through the transfer window. I just could see that being super destructive. So Mourinho has got to be convinced he can get a shift out of Pogba, and Pogba's got to demonstrate that he's willing to give him a shift. The other part of it is then what does it look like around Pogba? Because if you play 4-3-3, does he play with Matic and Herrera? Does he want to play deeper? I kind of like him deeper personally, but I think many people like him as a number 8. As you're a Man United fan, the one guy that I would have on the field to start with to get things back is Mata. I think Mata's a fantastic player. Yeah. And I would find some way to play Mata as your number 10 in the center of the park, and then I'd work the rest of it out around there. Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. Daryl and I have talked about that on several occasions, that if you use Pogba in the role that Deschamps used him for France, and even if you wanted to go like 4-2-3-1 and have him sitting deep but dropping into a defensive role at times, but then like spraying balls from deep, that seems like it would fit with Mata ahead of them. So I feel like you've just solved it right there. I hope Jose Mourinho is listening.
Well, I think Pogba, if he put his mind to it, can play anywhere he wants to. I think he's that. I mean, the physical talent, the technical ability, when he goes into second gear, not much third and fourth, he's unstoppable. I've seen him live for France in the Euros. And when he and Sissoko get moving, just get out of the way. But I think from my perspective, when you look at, Liverpool's a little different because they got that front three. But if you look at certainly City, the value of a Silva, and all these Spanish players that come out of Valencia and all these small European clubs, small Spanish clubs, and then gone through the Barcelona system or whatever. But I think that's what United needs. I think Marta could give them an identity, which then would bind in Martial and Rashford and Lukaku or whoever else you want to play. But to have a guy like Juan Mata sitting on the bench for me in a game that big, when you're going to get all that pressure, wouldn't you like to have somebody that can get their foot on the ball and unlock the opponent?
That seems like it would be a logical place to go. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've been a Matic fan, but boy, he looks a level short right now to me. He looks like it's not happening for him, and Herrera looks poor right now too. So there are two important players. And then I think you paid 52 million for Fred.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's definitely doing lots of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wasn't in the game day 18, I don't think, was he?
No, and hasn't been. And I really don't know what to make of that. I think like some have argued that it's like the Fabinho thing of it takes time to get used to it. I guess some have argued that it's maybe Jose Mourinho bringing in a player and then just not liking him anymore. So we'll see what happens there. We'll also see what happens for Liverpool because I believe you all got Bayern this weekend. Is that correct in the next round of the Champions League?
That is, yeah, that was the draw this morning. I saw that.
How are you feeling about that one?
Obviously, you'd like to get Lyon or maybe Ajax, although Ajax look really good right now. But if you're going to win the Champions League, you've got to go through the big clubs. So, yeah, it's nice to play them in the semi, but I think it's great. I think if Liverpool can give Bayern a good run, maybe get by them, I think it's good for English football. So, it's key that the draw is intentionally designed to keep home countries apart, so you don't have to play Tottenham or Man City or Man United this early, and play the best because if you're going to be legitimately the champions of Europe, you got to play the best at some point.
All right, and I wanted to switch our attention over to back to the United States for a moment. You mentioned that joining the Premier League can be a unique challenge. I would say taking over the U.S. national team gig right now is a pretty unique challenge. What do you think is the biggest obstacle or challenge facing Gregg Berhalter as he prepares to take over?
How do you keep the massive diversity of the American soccer culture and fan base happy? Mm-hmm. And I don't know that any nation in the world has that challenge as greatly as the United States. So the challenge and this is something that I'm sure you've talked about and people have talked about on your show. Do we want to be a Northern European, Western European style country, or do we want to be more of a Latin-based playing country? And then blending in players now with great cultural diversity, including, there haven't been a ton of African Americans representing our national teams over the years. So where are those players? Are they going to get chances to get in? New populations of people that are becoming eligible for the States that live here, not just people based in Europe. But I just don't know how you do it. If you look at the French national team, for example, yes, there's diversity, but it's essentially the blending of two broad cultural influences. And then you look at, England, they don't have that challenge. It's pretty much all from the Premier League, guys that have very similar backgrounds and cultural reference points. There is no footballing nation that plays it towards the top end of FIFA that has the challenges the US do in that regard, I think.
Do you have an opinion on what you think that the United States should be trying to do, or do you think is that a question reserved solely for Gregg Berhalter at this point?
Well, I'm going to tick off some people, and I don't mean to, because I don't mean to offend anybody. That's not the idea. I think outside of Canada, going into CONCACAF with some uniqueness, because we don't play like Nicaragua and Guatemala and Honduras and Mexico, I think could be a real strength. So I think that the Western, Northern European style for CONCACAF play could be an interesting approach, because it's unique, right? And it could be something that throws our competition off balance. If you do that with a run and gun group of 6'2" Vikings, okay, you'll get through CONCACAF probably. You probably won't get past Mexico, and you're not going to develop number 10s that can unlock people. So I have some sympathy for that style. If you went into more of a heavily possession-oriented, tons of individual technical ability, more of that Latin style, you're really going to have to look at the way we're developing players in the MLS, because the MLS is still a very athletic league as well, a blended league of athleticism and technical ability. So I don't think there's a singular answer. What you would like to see, though, and for your listeners that can sort of remember this, you want to see the development of people that have the ability of Tab Ramos and Claudio Reyna, guys that you can build the team around. And I just sung the praises of Juan Mata. So finding the next number 10s for this country, which I don't think Pulisic and Landon are or were, but that number 10 would be a key for us, I think. And that how do you do that? You have thousands of them, like they do in Spain, because that's the type of way you train the youth players when they're 8, 9, and 10.
Mm-hmm. All right. So what I've taken away from that is creative Latin-style Vikings should be our approach to the national team from now on.
Yeah, a couple of Juan Matas, and then some horses around.
that works. All right, Ian. Well, I really appreciate you taking all the time. I look forward to seeing you again in Chicago, as does Daryl. Daryl's not here, but I can speak for him in that regard. But really, thank you very much for taking all the time to talk about a whole variety of topics today.
Yeah, when I see you in Chicago, I'll come and sit at the booth and have a cup of coffee with you.
All right, that's good. My goal is to get out of this interview without you being like, I never want to speak to you again. So I'm glad we seem to have accomplished that.
Well, we didn't get to Berhalter. Do you want to quick get to Berhalter?
Yeah. If you don't mind, yeah. What were your thoughts when that appointment was made official?
I really appreciate the window of opportunity. First of all, everybody in America that loves football and loves U.S. football should buy Dave Sarachan a cup of coffee when they see him, because what he did for the year that he had to do the job, he did it with good grace. He played the kids, which was part of the directive. He took the kids to places like France and England. I think Dave Sarachan is a quality individual who did a lot for U.S. soccer, keeping that thing ticking over, even though it probably went on too long for Dave and for U.S. soccer people's liking. Berhalter, I feel sorry for him that his brother is the chief operating officer for U.S. soccer because of this nepotism thing. Yeah, he's known to U.S. soccer, but along with people like Jesse Marsh and Peter Vermees and other American coaches that have got MLS background, he's in that list of most deserving. He speaks multiple languages. He's coached overseas. He's played overseas. He's played for our national team. And good luck to him. I hope he does really, really well. 22 World Cup is important. I don't think we're going to have. It would be tough to have the debacle we had for last World Cup qualifying. And then the big job will be the 2026 World Cup campaign, because obviously we'll be hosting with Mexico and Canada. If Gregg could survive that long, that would be a hell of an achievement. But I think the focus for him should be getting things back to World Cup automatic, essentially automatic World Cup qualification, which is what the States have enjoyed for years. And I think for an American coach, we went with the American route this time, knowledge of the MLS and the players here, as well as Europe. Good luck to him. I hope he does really, really well.
And from a tactics standpoint, from what you've seen of him, what do you think he brings to the U.S. national team? What do you expect him to do tactically, or what would you like to see him do tactically?
Well, there's a video that was made for the 2002 World Cup, which showed Bruce in the locker room talking to the players before they went out against Portugal, and it was basically, paraphrasing, we're America, we're a superpower, we don't back down to anybody, let's go after them. And it worked, right? It worked spectacularly in 2002. Jurgen said we were going to do that, but then he was more judicious when we played higher level opponents. So we had this sort of a bit more of a schizophrenic kind of look. Sometimes we were high tempo and sometimes we were like uber conservative. I think Gregg is probably more in mind of front foot. And with the young players coming through the 17s and 20s, and the vast young talent pool, I think I'd rather see that group go front foot than try to play rope-a-dope and just get beaten up. I mean, I think guys like Sargent and Weyer and some of these young guys, they need to be let loose. So I'm hoping, and I believe it's in his personality, that we'll be pretty front foot, take the game to people. And I look forward to that if that's indeed the case.
And you did mention in 2026 we will be hosting. So I'm curious then, I asked Daryl the same question. If, say, the United States were drawn into a group with England, where are your rooting interest? Are you rooting for a draw, or are you maybe quietly leaning towards England?
That's a rough question. That's a really...
just to end on, just a light one.
Yeah, by virtue of the fact I've identified it as rough. Okay. So it is in my professional best interest for the U.S. soccer national team to do as well as they can. Uh-huh. And in almost all examples, I would love to see them do as well as they can. I would love to see a U.S.-England World Cup final. I could make the case that America has probably as many assets to win a World Cup quicker than England could. I really believe that. I really believe that if we talk about 3-4 World Cups out, America has just as much of a chance of winning one as England. But, you know, if Dele Alli's coming up against Matt Miaga for the game-winning goal in the 92nd minute of the World Cup final, I want Dele Alli to win that battle.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Well done.
I just want Dele Alli to nutmeg Matt Miaga, round Zach Steffen, and then we can all start. Because if you know British people, as clearly you do as well, we've been living off of a World Cup championship from 52 years ago, which was won under dubious circumstances, and we were the home nation. Mm-hmm. There is probably no nation in the world that would get more animated about winning a World Cup, and that includes Brazil and Argentina, than if somehow England could ever do it again. But I'm 54 years old. My lifetime, I'm not completely convinced, unless I live to 142 or something.
I don't know what you're talking about, because I think you've just guaranteed 2026 World Cup final is USA-England. So there you go. You just got to stick around till 2026. We're good.
Well, Dele Alli will be the grey-haired captain. His legs will have gone. There'll be talk about him coming to MLS, but he'll still be playing for us then.
There we go. All right, and I look forward to seeing you in Chicago now, because even more so because I want to talk to you about your ideas about World Cup assets. But we'll save that for Chicago. For now, I just wanted to say, Ian, thank you again very much for taking the time.
You're welcome, and I hope the people that listen to your show keep listening, because it's enjoyable chatting with you.